Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Tonia, so nice to be chatting with you once again.
And you. It's been a while.
It has. What was the last thing we talked about?
Everyone's talking about Jamie film adaptation.
That's right. So we're current within the last couple of months, at least.
Yeah. I mean, we've had plenty to talk about behind the scenes, of course, but we haven't really found a topic that's, ignited the need for a discussion quite like this.
Right. But that ends today because we have both watched the recent film adaptation of Edmond Rostand's play Cyrano de Bergerac, the adaptation just being called Cyrano. And I think we're full of opinions that we would like to share with the Musical Talk listening audience.
Many, many opinions.
Many opinions. You have such a good head for research. Do you want to give the breakdown of the big picture of this movie and who was behind it?
Yeah, so obviously, Mike has already informed you that it is a adaptation of the 1897 play Cyrano de Bergerac, which is a play which has been performed many, many times. It's constantly staged and has been adapted into many different things, operas. There's been lots of film adaptations. There's been several musicals. If you don't know the story or the plot, it's about the original play is about a man who's very self-conscious about his appearance, and he's in love with a woman called Roxanne. She has seen someone she's fallen in love with, like love at first sight, and he has this man has also fallen in love with Roxanne at first sight. So Cyrano offers his skills as a brilliant poet and decides to help this young man woo Roxanne because he wants Roxanne to be happy. And then basically there are consequences to these actions. In this particular version of Cyrano, this film adaptation is actually based on a stage musical which was written by Erica Schmidt. She is responsible for the screenplay here, and she is actually married to Peter Dinklage, who stars as Cyrano. He's reprising the role from the original stage production, which was a musical. And in this production, instead of Cyrano being self-conscious about the way he looks, he's self-conscious about his height. If you know Peter Dinklage from Game of Thrones, you'll know that Peter Dinklage suffers from achondroplasia, which is a type of dwarfism. And really, this version is a vehicle for Dinklage. It's been written specifically for him. And it sticks quite closely to the original story, but there are several differences, mainly to simplify the story, but it's pretty much along the same line. So if you know the play, you probably will understand what we're talking about.
It's worth mentioning, I think you skipped this in your otherwise impressively thorough overview, that in the original play, Cyrano has a large nose, sort of comedically long, and this is the source of some insecurity on his part. Mm-hmm. And the reason he never declares his love for Roxanne is because he's self-conscious about his appearance. And he seems to compensate with a larger-than-life theatrical persona. And in every other aspect of his life, he's very confident, but this is the area where he's not confident. Yeah. So the drama comes from Cyrano being desperately in love with Roxanne, Christian, the other young gentleman in the cadets, being desperately in love with Roxanne, Cyrano wanting Roxanne to be happy, and therefore helping a Roxanne-Christian romance, even though it breaks his own heart, just because he cares so much for Roxanne. He wants her to be in love with someone that Cyrano, thinks is a contender, is worthy. So that's the tension at the heart of this story. It's a love triangle, but a kind of enlightened love triangle where one vertex of the triangle is trying to help the other vertex of the triangle, which is what makes the story unique.
And I think, the thing that makes this story attractive to audiences and maybe to people approaching it to adapt things, I think everyone's always been in love with someone who's not been in love with them back. And it's that exploration of unrequited love, which is quite interesting.
There's an also interesting duality in the original play, between Cyrano's very flamboyant personality and this quiet, insecure, romantic burning, unrequited interior life that he has. And allegedly, the play introduced the word panache to the English-speaking world.
It did?
That's what at least two sources, one of which was Wikipedia, claim to be true. So in as much as we can trust those sources, but we think of panache as meaning a kind of confident flamboyance. And I think in the original play, that was key to Cyrano's personality. And I'm putting a peg on that point because I think it bears upon the interpretation that we see in the movie.
Mm-hmm. So, this film, Cyrano.
Right. His nose is normal sized.
Yes.
I joked when I saw the trailer, why is Peter Dinklage always getting cast in roles that involved some kind of nose disfiguration? Because as Tyrion Lannister, his nose was injured in combat. But in this case, his nose is fully intact. He's actually a fairly handsome gentleman. So he, like Dinklage himself, suffers from dwarfism, and this becomes the source of insecurity as opposed to the large nose. So that's the twist on this particular interpretation.
Yeah. And generally, I mean, let's start with a positive note. Generally, I felt that worked. I felt that worked really well. I thought the screenplay was very strong, and had this film been a non-musical film with a strong screenplay, I think I would have particularly liked it, and would have felt quite moved by it. But there lies the problem.
Presumably the musical adaptation aspect.
Yes, unfortunately. So I went to see this on Valentine's Day. I have to apologize to my other half for dragging him to see this particular film on Valentine's Day. Although I think he's actually enjoyed the process that I tend to go through when I see something that I'm not quite sure about or don't like particularly very much, of examining it quite thoroughly and trying to understand why. Yes, in my opinion, and this is something that I messaged Mike about quite quickly, because I walked out of the theatre and went, Mike will hate this film. And Paul was like, are you sure? You might want to get him to watch it first. I was like, I'll get him to watch it, but I know he'll hate it. I text Mike pretty much straight away and just said, I'm so conflicted about this film. I really like the screenplay. I found that really moving, but I hate it as well. I hate this film. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, I've really tried to like this film because I liked the screenplay and I really liked Peter Dinklage as Cyrano, but I hate this film. Or I hate the fact that it's a musical adaptation. Don't know. Was I right, Mike? Did you dislike this film quite as much as I did?
I did not hate it, though I think I had more problems with the story part of the film than you did. I had plenty of problems with the music part. But I see the film as very well intentioned. And I'm never going to get angry at somebody for trying to musicalize a romantic story, because I feel like that's the kind of story that does call out for musicalization. And as you pointed out, there have been a couple of musicals and at least one opera adaptation in recent memory.
4 operas.
4 operas. Wow.
4 operas.
So clearly this subject matter has called out to composers and book writers almost as long as it's been in existence. I did not hate it. And I also want to start out with...
Okay, that's quite strong of me. I don't hate this film. Like I said, I like Peter Dinklage. I like the screenplay. I hate the fact... I hate the musical aspect of it. And I found myself wishing that it wasn't a musical. And that's very strange for me because I love musicals. But every single time they open their mouth to sing, I was like, please don't sing. Or at least don't sing this particular material, and that's what we'll go into, I suppose.
Right. I don't think it's intrinsic. There's an intrinsic problem with musicalizing the story. I just don't think they did a very good job with it. I think that there were a number of omissions and maybe sins of commission, and a very pop music approach to songwriting that I think did not serve the story.
Yes.
But rather than viciously skewer this film through the heart with a rapier, I'd like to gently set it down to its death, much like Peter Dinklage does to the evil circus clown that he fights early on when he kills the clown and then kind of gently whispers sweet nothings to guide him gently to the afterlife. And that's what I'd like to do here. I'd like to take a sympathetic approach to this film.
We'll try. I'll try.
No one sets out to write a bad musical. And again, you can see the good intentions. And there are things to praise.
Yeah, okay. So I have a little bit of a problem with this, mainly because I listened to a interview with the director, which left me feeling really baffled. Yes, I guess no one sets out to write a bad musical. I think my problem with it is the fact that the director, in my opinion, doesn't seem to much like musicals, or doesn't really seem to understand the form, and I think that's the problem here.
Right.
I found myself thinking, why has it been structured? After watching it, I found myself thinking, why has it been structured like this? I don't understand why it's been structured this way. I don't understand the musical choices. I don't understand the lyrics. Literally don't understand the lyrics. I don't understand what they mean. They're that odd.
There are definitely some strange lyrics in this.
Yeah. And then I started thinking about a bit more, like, what would I do if it was a musical? And, finding myself going round and round in circles and I listened to the cast recording, and that was like torture. So I listened to a interview with Joe Wright, the director, on Front Row, which is a program we have here in the UK on BBC Radio 4. And he's directed some things I really like Atonement and Pride and Prejudice. But when it comes to this film, I found myself feeling rather confused about whether he likes musicals or what it is he has a problem with. Because something he said in the interview was that he intended to write a musical for people who don't like musicals, which is something that left me really baffled, because the people that want to see a film musical are people who like movie musicals, right? For a start.
Yeah, I think that whenever somebody sets out with that intention, the results are never good.
No.
The last example I can think of is the Sweeney Todd movie adaptation, where they threw away all the group numbers and made the songs entirely internal. And in doing so, divested that musical from some of its strongest musical moments. And I think the thought was, nobody likes big, cheesy group numbers, so let's just have a series of pop-style songs throughout a story. The problem is, I think you can't go into making a musical and decide that you're embarrassed by the traditions of musical theater.
Exactly.
You could certainly update the music. You can certainly impose a more pop music sensibility, right? Like you can be like Hamilton and introduce a fresh, new contemporary musical voice. But you cannot hate the conventions of musicals, because they evolved for a reason. And that is the unique demands of this form of storytelling. So if you decide that every song, now I'm kind of segueing us to the current musical under discussion, if you decide that every song is going to be like a pop song and just be this reflective moment, this static moment in time, telling people how you feel, but not otherwise addressing the story, the musical is going to falter, because you cannot tell a story through music if the songs don't actually tell the story.
I
If
agree.
that makes sense.
I agree. And something I've written here is, it's okay to be experimental, but the best musical adaptations tend to respect or use inspiration from things that have come before them. And there's plenty of musicals he could have drawn on, movie musicals he could have drawn on, that's structured well, that work. And it seems to me he's just gone, I don't really like the format. I don't really like the form of a movie musical, and decided to, try and make the movie musical experience more realistic. This is something he said in his interview. He wanted the music to move the plot forward, which in my opinion it doesn't at all, and to evolve naturally from the dialogue. So these are two things he said he really, really wanted to happen. And he said because the film medium is so realistic, his problem with movie musicals tends to be that obviously you're expecting your audience to work harder to suspend their sense of disbelief, and he felt that movie musicals didn't do that. So that's why he's approached the music aspect of this film the way he has. He said he wanted a few things. He said he wanted dialogue to song moments to seem natural, which is why the music was performed live, like Les Mis. So it was performed live on set with an earwig, so they could hear the accompaniment in their ear. He wanted them to embrace the flaws in their voices, and like breaths in the wrong place, all those things. And think that's why they've gone with a more pop infused score, and those moments where characters are actually singing about how they feel rather than moving the plot forward.
I think there's a little bit of what I call precision I want to impose on this, because I did not mean to imply it's bad to sing about how you feel. Every single song in every musical ever written addresses with somebody's feelings about something, because music is intrinsically emotional. Mm-hmm. But the difference between a pop song and a musical theater song, this is obvious to you, this is probably obvious to most of our listeners, but bear with me as I recover the obvious. A pop song is a static moment in time, usually, that expresses a series of emotions, usually about something that has already happened, right? There's very little present tense in many pop songs. It's, last year you broke up with me. That's verse 1. Verse 2, I was so sad when you broke up with me. Verse 3, I'm still sad that you broke up with me. It's really taking a snapshot of your soul and giving voice to those emotions. And the lyrics do not need to be particularly meaningful in a pop song. Mm-mm. They can be. And I think certain genres of pop are more literal and story-oriented than others. Country music tends to be very narrative. But even when pop music is narrative, it tends to be contained within a song. You tend to have a complete mini-story in a song. Paradise by the Dashboard Light. That's an entire epic story, but it's in one song. A lot of Billy Joel tunes are like that. But the most typical paradigm is you'll have symbolic lyrics, poetic lyrics. They don't necessarily have to mean anything. You're expressing a vibe. There might be a little bit of a progression, but there doesn't have to be. Musical theater songs typically advance the state of what's happening in the story. Either some action happens during the song, like Defying Gravity, or there's some decision made during a song, like in Soliloquy, or there's something that is revealed to us that we didn't fully know. In Cyrano, almost none of the songs give us any information that we didn't already know fully, and almost none of them advance the action in any way. They are all static pop songs. Most of them, not all, but most of them have abstract symbolic lyrics, and the symbolism is not always very coherent. So you just get these kind of vaguely poetic lines like, what's a good one? Heaven is wherever I fall, or I will close my eyes and let the falling skies lay down between us.
I don't even know what that means.
Right. I wrote, in my marginalia there. So there's these kind of lyrics work great in a pop song because they make you invent your own meaning. You might impose that meaning on some experience of your own. You might think about how someone broke up with you. And yeah, I did feel like I was letting the sky fall between us, whatever that means. But you can't really do that in a musical. You need to have simple, concrete imagery that in some way impacts the narrative going on, or you feel like the story has just stopped in its tracks for a dance break. And you can get away with a few moments like that in a musical, but in this case, every song was like that. And I think it really dragged on. I suspect it dragged on both of us. Yeah.
And also every song sounded the same. I can't really separate the songs in my head. I can't remember any of the tunes. I can't remember any of the songs particularly. Like I was trying to I had to listen back to the cast recording because I was so confused about which song. Like I vaguely remember something happening in a song, but I couldn't remember which one. I was going through each one because I didn't like trying to find it, and everything just sounded similar. Everything sounded the same. There was no upbeat musical number, was there, or anything? Like it was all the same.
The sword fighting music at the beginning, When I Was Born, was a little bit kind of an up-tempo, quasi hip-hop Hamiltonian kind of thing. But everything else was there were also a lot of songs that seemed to repeat the same message. Like you've got, I'm trying to remember, there are two songs near the beginning, right? There's Madly, and then there's the first time we hear the Overcome song. And those are, I think, back-to-back in the soundtrack. And they're interchangeable, right? It's I love you, a bushel and a peck, and you're not aware of me. That's kind of what they both say. Mm-hmm. And then later we have Someone to Say, which is a reprise of the opening number, the complete thought being, I want someone to say I love you, essentially. And it's sung by somebody else, but it's the same exact song. And it's also the song we heard at the beginning. So
I mean, most of the songs barely scan and barely rhyme. I mean, I was watching it thinking, I can't find the rhyming structure here. Like, what's going on? And that's not what I should be thinking about when I'm watching a film.
There's some real mistakes the songs make strategically, and these are less obvious than just saying, this is the fifth unrequited love song in a row. We talked briefly about the When I Was Born, the kind of quasi-hip-hop tune at the beginning. And I want to point out that this is when Cyrano is fighting with the evil circus clown, and at the time,
say who that character actually is.
I don't care.
It's not an evil circus clown. It's somebody who has taken offense to Cyrano. To be fair, the beginning Cyrano isn't particularly likable. We might go to that a bit later on. Somebody who's taken offense to the way that Cyrano is acting.
Right, and he demands honor be served, so they get involved in a sword fight. Yes. And I like the groove actually to this tune. The problem is, in addition to some really terrible lyrics, this is our first introduction musically to Cyrano. This is the first time he ever sings. And in a musical, when your main character sings for the first time, they had better be giving you some important information about either the world or their place in the world or the thing that they want, if it's the traditional I Want song. What we need to get a really clear introduction to who they are. And I want to point out that all the lyrics in the song portray Cyrano as bitter and kind of complainy and very literal. Like he's talking about very kind of down to earth. He's grinding our face in the fact that he was born with these disabilities and he's resigned to the fact. So our first introduction to a character who's supposed to be very ultra romantic and have panache is very much of somebody who's discontent. And the fact that he's stabbing someone to death at the same time kind of underlines the point of his discontent.
Yeah.
And I feel like what he should have been doing, and I suspect this is the vibe in the original play, is he should have been toying with his opponent and have a kind of joyous self-mockery and really be mocking the other person in a very you're not bothering me in any way whatsoever. The spirit here was, if you want to diss on me, get in line. And there is a lyric to that effect. But he just seems so angry and sullen, and this is our introduction to him. So I think the song really sets us off in the wrong direction with respect to introducing Cyrano.
I think that they kind of rewrite some of those wrongs as we go on, because you do like the character of Cyrano. You obviously understand that he loves Roxanne and wants her to be happy, and that is something that was a particularly redeeming feature. Also, is when he does slay his opponent finally, he's very gentle. Like we say, he lays him down gently and, talks to him gently as he's dying to make it a much more pleasant experience. And Roxanne even says to the Duke, who's desperate to marry her, I assure you he took no pleasure from this act. So there are certain things that sort of set that right, but I completely agree with you that the tone of that first song isn't right. And generally, anything that Cyrano sings from that point onwards felt to me completely wrong, because the lyrics are not poetic, romantic, or genius in any way. Every time Cyrano opens his mouth to sing, it doesn't reflect his soul. Cyrano is meant to be this genius, this poetic genius, this romantic. That's the thing that makes Roxanne fall in love with him. His very being, everything he is, and when he opens his mouth to sing, the music doesn't show that. It doesn't show you that he's a poetic genius, because he comes out with these things that just sound nonsensical and really basic. And that's my general problem with the music in this film, is the characters are meant to be expressing these really emotive and, grand sort of feelings, aren't they? And it's just really basic and really kind of dull. But when Peter Dinklage is speaking the dialogue, I believe him. I believe his Cyrano until he starts to sing, and I think that's the main problem. It's the lyrics and the material that he's been given. It's not his capabilities as an actor. It's the actual material he's singing. And there's a scene towards the end, the last scene, the final scene where he dies, where they're having this beautiful scene. I was really moved by, the scene where, I don't know if you know the end of the play. I don't think I'm really spoiling the story here. The end, the final scene, Roxanne realizes that Cyrano has been the one writing to her all along, not Christian as she believed. And he's dying. So he gets angry with her and he walks away. And up until that point, there's been this beautiful scene that's really like emotive, and you really understand, Roxanne's anger, but also Cyrano's desperation to tell the truth. And then as he walks away, she starts to sing, and I found myself going, no, please don't sing, please. And then they start singing these lyrics that don't mean anything anymore. And I found myself just completely turning from so over emotionally upset about this to I don't care anymore. I found myself going, oh, right, well, I don't care now. Because there's nothing, it didn't move me. And the music didn't move me in any way. The lyrics didn't move me in any way. They didn't enhance that moment in any way. In fact, they ruined the emotion of that moment completely. And they start singing to one another, dialogue, back and forth, which could have still been spoken dialogue. And then they kind of focus on this one line. It's something like, if you ever love someone so much you can't breathe. It's not that, what I just said, because I can't actually remember what it was, but it's something along those lines. And if they'd have gone along with the West Side Story thing of spoken dialogue, he's dying, they sing that line because that's a line that they repeat all the way through. That might have been okay. Because I kind of would have like, and then he takes his last breath and he dies. Like, that would have worked for me. But having them sing back and forth for several minutes before he dies just made me switch off towards the end. And I was just literally like, I was invested till now, and now I no longer am. I don't know if you felt like that at the end.
Yeah, first of all, there's the clumsiness of the lyrics there. Roxanne does not rhyme with understand. And I know that seems like it's splitting hairs, but all the lyrics had those kind of problems in rhymes. No, Cyrano, I understand there's an attempt to make a kind of internal rhyme there, but it's not actually a rhyme. That's what's called an identity, where you have the exact same stressed vowel and stressed consonants before it. The real problem here, lyrical grousing aside, is the lack of clarity of the dramatic dynamic here. The two possible ways you could end this in a song is either they both realize, Roxanne realizes Cyrano was her wooer this entire time, and she declares love, and he acknowledges it, and they have a happy moment before he dies. That's a happy, tragic moment, I should say. Yeah. The other alternative interpretation is Roxanne realizes that Cyrano has been writing this entire time, and she declares her love, but Cyrano maintains his deception to the end and says, no, that was Christian. You were in love with the right guy. You didn't make a mistake. And he nobly goes to the grave knowing that he's preserving her concept of her love of her life. He's not disrupting what she thought. And then perhaps she knows deep down that he's lying, and she loves him even the more for it. Yeah. The latter would be the more traditional romantic ending, where love is highlighted through a conflict with that love. Mm-hmm. I couldn't tell which of these they were going for. No. I could not tell if Cyrano was saying, no, it wasn't me. I promise you it was Christian. Or if he's saying, yeah, it was me. I'm in love with you. And, now I have to die, but I've always wanted to tell you. It seems to split those two approaches. And it's because of the lack of clarity of the lyrics that we don't quite. Maybe if I watched it again, I would be able to figure out which of those two they were going for. But I think if I can't figure it out the first time, and I'm a reasonably attentive audience member, there's something wrong with the lyrics and the scene.
Yeah, I agree. And it's a pity, isn't it, really? I think generally throughout, when my problems with the music and lyrics, I've just found myself thinking, there's such a better way to do this. Like, there's a better way to do this. It's, I was like, this is actually quite a strong screenplay. And there's I was thinking on the way home, I was saying to Paul, like my partner, they could have done this, they could have done this, and it would have been much, much better than what we ended up with at the end. And I think that's the really sad thing, is because, I could have been invested in this film. I could have been invested in this modern adaptation, but I just found myself baffled by it all the way through. And wanting the singing to stop, which is not like me. Like, I can get on board with a musical adaptation usually, but I just found myself thinking, there's a better way to do this. There's a better way to do this all the way through. And, I just felt so baffled by the whole thing. And and like wasn't really understanding what I was watching sometimes. It was weird. It was like weird conflict between this is fantastic screenplay. This for me, like the great screenplay. Like I really quite like the way that Erica Schmidt adapted the screenplay and she simplified some of the elements, and then find myself so conflicted because of the music and lyrics. And I just feel like you should never watch a film and feel like it's a shame that they're singing. It's a shame that there's music in this film. And I just feel as though, like, having listened to sort of the approach of the director, that why try and improve upon a form you really don't understand? Do you know what I mean? It seems to me that the writing team, not necessarily the screenplay writer, but the composer, lyricists, and the director don't really understand the form. And I think that's the problem here. They're trying to improve upon a form they don't understand.
I agree, and I think the interview sounds like it reveals that kind of fundamental conflict with the form.
Mm.
You've been very complimentary of the screenplay, and here, well, let me lump the screenplay and the production into one category. I'll just call it the non-musical stuff.
Yes.
I had some problems in this realm, and I thought I would bounce them off of you and see what you thought. Mm-hmm. Number one, so in the original, the stage play and prior adaptations, we feel like we understand why Cyrano doesn't want to declare his love. It's because he has this long nose, and people make fun of him during the play, the original play. There are moments where he's ridiculed because of his nose. And that very much was the defining image of Cyrano, is this elongated Pinocchio-like nose and an otherwise dashing, handsome person. And we get a sense in those earlier interpretations that his physical appearance was a real liability, was a real social liability. It was something that can cause enough shame that would stop somebody from declaring their love to someone they've loved their entire life. There would be, despite how capable Cyrano has been in all past interpretations, his physical appearance was enough to hold him back. And I think that is meant to inspire sympathy, because we can all understand someone in that position. Now, do you think in the world of this story as it is filmed, is dwarfism any kind of social or actual liability?
I mean, so obviously, Cyrano is quite highly respected. Obviously, he's a good soldier. He's got a great mind, and that's clear. That most of like at the beginning where he interrupts the play and he comes in and he's being a little bit obnoxious. The audience don't really see. The audience quickly get on his side, and nobody in the audience points out his height, except for the person he ends up dueling with. And I guess that's one of the only situations we see that, except for when he first meets Christian, and Christian doesn't know who he is and instantly points out his height. It's the first thing he says about him. There's only those two moments in the whole production where people, make a point out of it. And I think maybe one of the things that they actually tried to do in this is move on from that and actually make it more about the romance. So yes, Cyrano is, Cyrano in this particular production has dwarfism. I think what they're trying to actually say is it's more of a conflict within himself. He's so convinced of the fact, because the thing is there actually are some changes from the original story, which kind of there are several attempts in the original story to get Cyrano to tell the truth, and he's he's more conflicted about whether he should tell the truth because of how Roxanne will take the truth, etc. Whereas in this production, it seems it is that, but he's so convinced. He's so convinced. It's more that he's too proud to tell Roxanne how he feels because he's so convinced that will be a problem. And I think it's more that he's convinced rather than the people. And I got that more. I understood that.
Well, I think that you're pointing out something very important, is that there doesn't appear to be prejudice in the world of this story as it is filmed against people with dwarfism. We other than one or two, the evil clown makes fun of him, and then there's maybe a brief passing mention of his height, and he refers to himself as a midget once.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like the universe really there's no penalty in this world for dwarfism.
Yeah, but this world is very, very unclear. I mean, this is the only problem I had with the screenplay, Mike, is where is this film set? What era is this film set in? Because it's meant to be set in like France in like 1640, I think the original play. And this film is, this film is, what it's filmed in is filmed in Italy. And I was like pretty sure it was somewhere pretty Mediterranean. Which is very odd compared to the original play. I had no idea where it was set. I had no idea who they were fighting in this war that they're fighting. I had no idea what time period we were in, because the dress, the costumes, the look of the film is very abstract. Like there are nods to like 18th century dress. Like powdered wigs, powdered faces. The dress style is what you would imagine. Think like Mozart era, that kind of thing. Whereas that's not like the original play. I have no idea about the style they were going for. And to me, that's kind of important because this world is not very clearly defined. So like, the look of it, where we are, what's happening, it's not that clearly defined. Maybe because they want you to focus on the romance and actually, like simplify it to the extent that that's what you focus on. You focus on these three characters and that's it. But I feel as though like you need to understand the world that they're in. I didn't really understand the world that they're in. I didn't really understand the values of the world that they were in. Maybe mainly because, like back then, I can't imagine them being very accepting of someone with dwarfism. So generally the world was unrealistic. And I think maybe that's why they decided to, purposefully go down this ambiguous route, for that reason, because they knew, like in order for this to work, I think generally people are going to have to be relatively accepting. Because the thing is, Roxanne is so accepting. This is one of the things that one of the reasons why, it's quite tragic that he really doesn't believe that she will love him because of his height, because she accepts him no matter what. Like she's his friend. She wants to, she almost wants to protect him from the Duke by saying that she's severed ties with him and all that kind of sort of stuff, even though she hasn't. Like she accepts him no matter what. Christian accepts him no matter what. And I think that's what makes it, maybe that's why they decided to go with this ambiguous route where it's not clear the society we're in. It's not really clear what their values are. Generally, people accept him. And, they want you to focus. They want to simplify it to the extent that it makes it so tragic that he can't accept himself. But I guess I am really trying to shoehorn a kind of idea. But it's really hard when the world is that ambiguous. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. And all right, bear with me as I draw this tenuous line of logic from this topic all the way back to the music, because I think it's actually relevant. I completely agree. This seems to be an ambiguous period in antiquity. And because of that, there also seems to be no social prejudices against dwarfism. Mm-hmm. And at the beginning of the story, it seems like Cyrano is a crowd favorite. Mm-hmm. And it's also worth mentioning that he is allowed into the military despite his stature. He is given an officerial position. And there also appears to be no physical liability of dwarfism, in the sense that he is able to fight off 10 assailants single-handedly with a sword. Mm-hmm. And a sword is it's a reach weapon, right? So if someone's got 1 or 2 extra feet of reach on you, that's a serious problem. And he dispatches 10 assailants single-handedly. So in this universe, there doesn't even seem to be much of a physical penalty for people who are suffering from dwarfism. And I think this is partially maybe a desire to strip away some of the ugly prejudice of the real world and make a more receptive world that's perhaps more closer to the world that we wish we had today, right? Where people who are different are accepted and not ridiculed. Mm-hmm. Now, this has a story consequence, because if Cyrano is suffering less from persecution and from limitations of his physical stature, if he's an officer in the army and everyone loves him, then why is he so hung up about his height? Like, what is the cause of him being hung up about his height in a world where there's nothing wrong socially or existentially for dwarfism? It's very hard to get inside his head and understand that the cause of this hang-up that would prevent him from declaring his burning love from someone he's loved his whole life. What is his obstacle? And now I'm going to wend our way back to the music. In a musical, we need to know what the main character wants, and we need to understand why they can't get it. Mm-hmm. Because if we don't understand those things, then there's no tension that drives our sympathy. And there's also no subject matter for the music. Mm-hmm. I finally arrived back at the music. So what I think this film desperately needed was some musical insight into Cyrano's head, where he sang about something other than the fact that he's in love. You know, we get it. You're in love. You sang it 3 different songs, 3.5. We get that you're in love. So what we really needed to hear him sing about is why he didn't feel that he was capable of facing Roxanne with that love. He hints at it in dialogue now and then, but we need a song on that subject because we cannot understand it. It doesn't really happen emotionally unless it's in song. That's one of the laws of musicals, if we can presumptuously declare there'd be a law, that nothing has emotional reality unless it is in song. And this was so important that it was the primary conflict of his entire character arc. It's the thing that causes his self-denial, his entire life. It drives the plot because his shame is the reason that he helps Christian in the first place. We need to get inside his head and understand why he feels the shame. And I would argue there needs to be a song later where he says, you know, now's the time, maybe during the balcony scene or right before it or right after it. I'm rewriting the score for the filmmaker. I hope they appreciate this. The service is offered free of charge. There needed to be a song of decision making where he says, you know, I really feel like I could, you know, she's so sweet, she's so accepting. I really feel like I could tell her right now that I love her. And then we need to see him turn that down. We need to see him struggle with that decision and say, no, I'm just too ashamed. There has to be some reason. Or maybe he says in song, wait, but that would mean I'd have to admit that I was ashamed this whole time. And I'm too proud. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be made a fool of and confess that I was ghostwriting somebody else's romance. That would make her see me for a coward, and I refuse to be a coward. If we had a song like that, I think this whole thing might have been pulled off because there would have been a trajectory that this character followed, a traditional tragedy where we see him so close to the thing he wants, and he's held back by some flaw.
Well, maybe this is the reason why. So there's actually a change from the original play, where there's an element of this. It's kind of this is basically there's like a situation in the original play where Roxanne actually turns up. She manages to flutter her way across enemy lines, and she turns up basically in the French camp as they're about to go to battle. And she knows that they're all starving, so she brings them all food. And the character who's the Duke in the film, who's not the Duke, he's not a Duke in the play, he's a Count in the play, he's with her, trying to persuade her to leave. And she tells Christian, I would love you even if you were ugly. So Christian goes and tells Cyrano this and says, you need to tell her the truth. And he rejects it and says, absolutely not. I don't believe her at all. Until she says to him the same thing. She says, look, I would love Christian even if he was ugly. And he has a moment there thinking, maybe I should tell her the truth. But Christian is killed instantly, like straight away after that. And he decides then, because of that moment, he was ready to tell her. But then Christian is killed and he says, I absolutely cannot tell her now. There's no way I can tell her now because this man has died. And she's devastated, like it devastates her. She like collapses and she has to be like taken away. He's like, if I was to tell her now, it would be devastating. So he decides to conceal the truth from her. So the reason why that decision's almost like made for him. I know it's not in the same way that you were describing, you know, like there needs to be some sort of internal conflict. Basically, this is sort of some consequence that stops him telling her, which is not, I mean, he just decides not to tell her in this film, right? There's no consequence.
Right.
It's not like she's going to go insane because because this is made, in the play she's distraught and has to be taken away. And she spends 15 years mourning Christian after that. So his decision not to tell her, he cares about Roxanne in the original play, but he actually sends her into 15 years of lonely mourning because he can't tell her the truth. In the film, it's 3 years has passed, and he's just adamant that he can't tell her the truth. There's no conflict. I think maybe this is the only change from the original play that doesn't really work for this film, because it's kind of situational in the play. Like, you kind of understand, okay, like, she's absolutely distraught by Christian's death. There's no way he can tell her, at least right now. And then he doesn't tell her for 15 years, which is kind of like, it's one of those things where you keep a secret from someone and then you've kept it so long that you can't tell them. Do you know what I mean? It kind of makes sense. Whereas in the film, he just will not tell her. And we never, like you said, get to understand why he won't tell her. So maybe this has changed from the original material there that makes this not work even further. And like you say, there needed to be some situation or some explanation to why he's not going to tell her that would make sense to us. And we just don't get it, mainly because of the change from the play and because they don't know how to tell us that in musical format.
Well, exactly. And I think that needed to be a decision in song to really emotionally resonate, as said. So we don't have that. And we are left to mentally construct Cyrano's emotional state and his decision making. We were meant to infer it from a few moments or glimpses or lines of dialogue. And this is a perfectly reasonable thing to do in a non-musical film.
Well, that's just why I say I like the screenplay, because if this was as in, like, I say I like the screenplay. Obviously, I don't like the screenplay alongside the songs because they don't work together. But if this was a screenplay, this is the non-musical film, the screenplay would have worked for me, and I can see how they would have developed upon it as just a non-sung film. Like, I can see how it would work as a non-sung film. I can see how the bare bones of the screenplay would work as a non-sung film. But like it really doesn't work alongside the music, does it? I think that's the problem. There's just no way that the music in its current form could improve upon what they've got. Do you know what I mean?
Indeed. And where we have that opportunity, if we were to try, again, appointing ourselves as dramaturgs to this film retroactively, if we were to try to fix this,
yes.
And look at that scene in the battlefield where Christian dies, I think in this case, the implication is he's killing him. He's allowing himself to be slain as a gesture back to Cyrano to give Cyrano the courage. This is where I think we would put the Cyrano's decision-making song, where he says, wait, maybe I should really reveal myself to Roxanne, like see him go through that in song. But instead what the film gives us is this very strange, almost like a Civil War group lament about the realities of war, sung to us by anonymous soldiers, each of whom gives us a little glimpse of their personal story. And the lyric here, which we alluded to earlier, is "Heaven is wherever I fall."
Yeah.
So this is both a sin of omission and commission. Omission because we really needed Cyrano to make some decision there. And we needed to be inside his head and understand why he is still not going to reveal himself to Roxanne. And again, he had to sing about that. And then the sin of commission is, who cares about these anonymous soldiers?
I know.
There's a lyric, like each person's lyric and little mini story is more ridiculous than the one that comes before it. So there was a line, one soldier, we have never met this fellow before, I believe, sings, "I have a girl. I think I love her. I should have told her. Instead, I told her mother."
What?
Now, A, who are you? Why are we being told your story towards the end of a musical where we desperately want the momentum to pick up and we want to focus on the main characters? Why are we taking this little side tour with a random soldier?
Yeah.
Also, why would you tell somebody's mother if you didn't have the courage to? Like, that doesn't even make sense, right?
I
Give
know.
us a story. Like, tell us the story about the guy who thought he loved his girl and he was about to tell her, but he was drafted and whisked away to the front, and he's going to tell her as soon as he gets back home, which, as we know, in a war film is a death sentence for a character if you talk about what you're going to do after the war. But at least give us something that makes sense. But I think they were looking for a rhyme for "love her."
Yes.
And the closest
they could think of was mother.
I have to derail us with a public service announcement for all lyricists, and that is, I'll try to keep this short. Please don't put the word love in a rhyme position in your lyrics unless you want it to fit like a glove or to come from heaven above or feel like you just had a hard shove. Or it's the thing you're thinking of. Those are basically your options. So unless you want to be cornered into using one of those
cliches,
chestnuts, I was going to say like time-honored chestnuts of lyric, please don't do it. Put love somewhere else in your lyric.
That is a very, very good tip. You should be paying. The people should be paying you for this advice, Mike.
Well, here's what I want to say positively. There was musical merit in this movie. And I mean that in the literal sense of music considered apart from lyrics. I was really taken by some of the instrumental interludes, the underscore.
Oh, yeah.
Like the opening, if you listen to the cast album, or the soundtrack, the opening instrumental, that's hard to say, the opening instrumental introduction is actually quite lovely. It's delicate, it's beautiful, it evokes emotion of
yeah,
yearning.
But who is the score written by? Is the score written by the same team?
I think it might be. I should have prepped this, but I believe it's the same people. And I remember thinking later, I wished the songs in the movie were as good as the underscore. And maybe this is speaking to your imagined possibility where it's not a musical and it's just a spoken dialogue with underscore. And likewise, I feel like the songs, if you just think of them musically, I often resonated with them. Even though, yes, we had 30 ballads in a row and we only needed one. But if I imagined it as kind of an indie pop tune, not part of a musical, I often liked what I was hearing. And I think I had some conflicted emotions there.
I just need more than a pretty tune after pretty tune. Do you know what I mean? I just need more than that. I need more. Oh, that was one of the lines, wasn't it?
Very Little Mermaid.
I need more. It also looked beautiful, this film. Again, need more than pretty visuals and pretty sounding tunes. I need more than that. Do you know what I mean?
I have one last axe to grind. And this is an area that I think my opinion contrasts with yours. Mm-hmm. I had a real problem with Peter Dinklage's performance.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And there are a couple of aspects to this because I actually think he's quite a capable actor. He did this film in an unguised American accent. He did not do a mid-Atlantic, slightly theatrical American accent as he did in Game of Thrones that helps smoothen the rough edges of the American accent and makes us feel more compatible with antiquity. He didn't do that. And I think it's because he and/or the director maybe wanted a very naturalistic approach.
Yeah.
But there was that. There was the use of contemporary idioms, both in lyrics and in dialogue. For example, the lines, "What has God been smoking?" Halloween's my favorite day.
Holiday, yeah.
That was the most American
but
lyric
that's not Peter Dinklage's performance. I mean,
you're correct. That's not his fault per se. But I think that worsened the thing that was his fault, which was his using his American accent without any kind of softening or translation. It constantly pulled me out of the sense of time and place. I constantly was aware of a contemporary American actor inserted into this timeless romance from a Europe that never was.
Actually, I completely agree with that point. I would have preferred him to have softened his American accent. But again, I think it must have been something, at least the decision was made, sort of alongside where the director was going, because like I say, we don't know where this film's set. We don't know when it's set. We have a vague idea, but we don't really know. And, the director was very, his vision was that this was going to be a more naturalistic film, and it was something that, people would, it had to be, so he maybe didn't want all the actors to, to change their voices or use a voice that was different from their own, because he wanted to be natural in that way.
Right.
And again, I guess, in my opinion, Peter Dinklage did the best with what he was given. And, still managed to give a quite moving performance despite the fact despite what he's given to work with. I think that some of those things are not necessarily his fault. and I think it's hard to pin it on him because it's not necessarily, his fault. And sometimes you really have to go with the direction that you're given, I think something that I feel quite strongly about, something I said to Paul, my partner, was if this was just a non-musical film and it had been the screenplay had been developed further and, like we got insight into how Cyrano feels via dialogue, I could have seen how this would have been like a big deal for Peter Dinklage, and I think it was intended to be his, like, because the thing is they had a limited release before Oscar nominations, so this could be included. I mean, I think it's got 1 or 2 nominations for like costumes, for example.
Right.
But I think I could see how I think this was intended to be his shot at like Best Actor at the Oscars or something. I know he's been nominated for Best Actor in a comedy or musical at the Golden Globes. But I can see how if this film had not involved music, it could have possibly been his, shot at a big award or a big, I think I could see why they're kind of thinking along those lines. And because of the music, it just falls short of that. And it's a real shame because actually I think he's a great actor. And it's something that really drew me to this film. The reason I wanted to watch it was because I really like Peter Dinklage. And the idea of him playing Cyrano was something was like, okay, I can see how that would work. I bet that would be great. Which is one of the reasons why I was really disappointed in the film, because the musical aspect just, I think it makes, it just made the film fall so far, from my expectations. And I think that's the problem. It's the film, it's the material. It's not necessarily him. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I will also argue that his performance was so naturalistic that it did not feel rooted either in the time or place, but also it felt at odds with the concept of Cyrano, in that Cyrano is this grandiose and somewhat self-denying soul, kind of like who has a theatrical front to him, right? I mean, I think this is the traditional concept of Cyrano, and that the pain is this deeply felt romantic agony that punches through his attempts to contain it, and that when it manifests, it's the tears of a clown, essentially. I think like that's, and Peter Dinklage, his pain was so raw and so literal and so this searing agony that just felt it was not of the romantic tradition. The scene where Roxanne is confessing her love for Christian, and you see Peter Dinklage, you see Cyrano go from thinking, oh, she's into me, to realizing, oh, she's into somebody else. That performance, it was very emotive. It was very powerful. It was very true to life. It was too true to life. I felt like I was watching somebody in present day getting bad news. And there was no attempt to channel that pain and think, what if this character really is proud and he really is theatrical and he has such force of personality that he can shame an actor off their own stage, and his whole soul is poetry. Why are we getting this very literal, very I am bleeding into your lap kind of unfiltered dump of pain? I felt like the performance was just too modern in its conveyance of heartbreak.
But then I think, again, that's a problem with the material. I think the problem with this modern retelling is that it's done away with a lot of that kind of grandiose romanticism that the original play has, and replaced it with a modern understanding of romance that normal people, I put this in quotation marks, normal people can understand. I think it's almost to the point of I'm going to say almost oversimplifying it to the extent that it's kind of spoon feeding you an idea of what romance is. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
It's kind of simplified it to the point that a basic person can, the most dim person, the most Christian in the audience, I mean, Christian, and the character Christian is meant to be incredibly dim in this, could understand, because it's naturalistic to this, to the point of, most people today could understand it. Whereas I find that a little bit insulting, because I don't think people are that basic. I think that's I think that's maybe what you're picking up on here. I think it's removed so much of that kind of dramatic and well, it's removed the subtlety, essentially, hasn't it? It's removed the subtlety.
Right.
It's funny how Cyrano the original play, managed to be so grandiose and romantic, and he's a character with great panache, but it's because that's a cover for his kind of sensitive side, I suppose, isn't it? It's a cover for that. What's the word I'm looking for? It's a cover for his vulnerability.
Yes.
And what you're picking up on is they have to show you his vulnerable side, because that's something that they have to make it obvious so the audience can understand it. And that's a shame, really, isn't it, when you think about it, because audiences are not that stupid. And that's maybe, like another problem with the fact that they've tried to go down the naturalistic side, and they've tried to make this as much of a non-musical film as a musical film can be, by saying, well, okay, we think the audiences can't suspend their sense of disbelief, and we don't want it to be over the top and too we don't want people to suddenly burst into song. We don't want it to be we don't want too much fanfare and all that kind of sort of stuff. And it's kind of saying to your audience, well, we need to simplify this because you're not capable of using your imagination. I find this problem in a lot of modern films, where they simplify things to the point that they kind of imply their audience is stupid. Do you know what I mean? Do you see what I think I've talked about this, about, films like, for example, The Greatest Showman. Sometimes the imagery they use is so obvious, because I feel like they're spoon feeding it to the audience. Like I think some directors and some filmmakers potentially think their audience is so stupid that they're going to make a blockbuster film, they have to make it so basic and obvious. I think sometimes that's the problem, and I think maybe that's what's happened here by going down this naturalistic route.
I don't want to go so far as to say that you cannot try to imbue a musical with some naturalism of style. And you and I have talked about the difficulty of reconciling the photorealism of a movie with the larger-than-life necessities of a musical. And we talked about this in the discussion of Jamie, for example.
But I'll go back to my point of, you need to understand the form before you can experiment with it. Think about some of the most experimental musical films. We have, like, Cabaret, for example. That's a Fosse, who knows musicals. Do you know what I mean? See, even though it's not everyone's cup of tea, what he's done, it works on screen. And that's because he understands the form. They think about something more current, like Steven Spielberg. Okay, Steven Spielberg is lucky enough that he has been given a gift in West Side Story. That film works mainly because he understands the material he's got, but also he understands the form. So any changes he's made, well, one, he needs to have a pretty good excuse for making those changes. They generally weren't to improve upon the musical form. They weren't necessarily to improve upon the musical because it was no good in his opinion. It was the change that Steven Spielberg made to that film, West Side Story, in his modern adaptation, basically to help a modern audience understand how a 1950s character would have felt. I never felt like he was spoon-feeding us ideas or simplifying things in order for us to kind of go, are you getting the idea now? Do you know what I mean? The changes were made were trying their best. They didn't always work, but they were trying their best to complement the material. You could tell that Steven Spielberg had so much respect for the material and for the form. And because I was really worried about that particular adaptation, thinking, oh God, what's he going to do to it? If it's a modern adaptation, what are they going to do to it? It was generally very true to the original, with some, with quite a lot of changes. But, when I've spoken to people, no one said, why did you do that? That didn't work. More or less kind of sort of, well, see why you did that. But for me, that didn't work. And, that's how people generally have felt about it. Whereas, and I know this is an adaptation of a stage musical, and they're starting off with something drastically different to West Side Story. I mean, West Side Story is something that's very well established and very well written. But he understands the form. And you can start to add these things. You can start to experiment with things. You can start to do these things if you understand your material and you understand your form. Whereas I feel like these people do not understand what they're trying to do.
I agree. I think if you are embarrassed by musicals, you'll never make a good one.
Yeah.
If you flinch away from the sort of fundamental core that every good musical has in common, this larger-than-life exulsion, if that's a word, the result is always going to be compromised. And we saw it in the Sweeney Todd adaptation by Tim Burton, and I think it exists elsewhere. I think a very good example of taking a stage musical and giving it a photorealistic movie treatment that has a little more stylistic naturalism, or I should say realism, because naturalism means something different, is Tick, Tick, Boom, which I know you haven't seen that. But when you do see that, I think you'll see it's a very good example of what this show does not accomplish successfully. Tick, Tick, Boom does try to set that story in a more literal environment, and it works, and it works better than the stage version, actually, significantly better. So I will look forward to hearing your thoughts on that.
Directed by Lin-Manuel Miranda, who clearly understands the form and appreciates the form.
And I think that's the difference. I think if the creator embraces musicals, then when they try to adapt them for films, they will still retain that core, that emotional core that a musical needs. And if a director doesn't quite get musicals, you're going to get an awkward halfway between musicals and what feels like a play interrupted by pop songs.
Yeah, which is sadly what we have here.
Indeed.
Yeah. I hope we haven't been too down on it. Because, like I said, I really wanted to like this film. I went into it. I mean, I went on Valentine's Day, for heaven's sake. So if you want to watch something, you're going to take your significant other to something on Valentine's Day. You want it to be good, don't you? And you want it to be enjoyable, romantic. And we both came out of the cinema and we're just like, oh. So,
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I suspect it's going to make a lot of money out of loyalty for Peter Dinklage. And
I don't know. I mean, the screening that I was at, so I went on Valentine's Day, which admittedly was the day that it opened. It was on screen 8, which was right at the top of the building. Literally, you had to walk for 10 minutes to get to it. I bought my tickets 2 weeks before. And, I was like probably one of the first person to buy tickets. It was pretty much empty. And if that's, I haven't seen an awful. Well, the problem in this country, and I don't know how things were in the US, but in this country, it was supposed to come out in January, and then for some reason the release was delayed. I keep seing, advertisements for January, which is very confusing. So I think people are going to look for the film, and it's not there, and all that kind of sort of stuff. And they haven't put an awful lot of effort into advertising it here necessarily, and I'm not entirely sure it will make. I don't know if it will go and make a lot of money. I have no idea. And I think also, I don't know if you noticed, have you watched the trailer for this film?
I have not.
So the first like the Sweeney Todd trailer, the first section of this trailer is you have no idea it's a musical until the end of the trailer where they start singing. And then you realize it's a musical. And I think maybe I don't know why they chose to do that with Sweeney Todd. I don't know whether they tried to sort of look how cool this gory film is. Oh, by the way, it's a musical. Ha ha ha! I bet you didn't think we could make basically a traditional slasher film, violent horror film, and make it a musical. It's weird. And they've kind of done that with this as well. They've kind of done, they've gone down the route of, let's make it look like not a musical. And then, by the way, it's a musical right at the end of the trailer. And I think that will turn people off that don't like musicals. So if they've made this film for people who don't like musicals, they've not done a very good way of marketing it to people who don't like musicals. Do you see what I mean?
I wonder if so this is meant to be this is the classic litmus test of whether songs are working in a musical, is that if you take them out, nothing really changes. And I wonder if they couldn't make a cut of this film with literally no songs in it that would still be a coherent movie.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be quite interesting, wouldn't it? Because the thing is, they often repeat what they want. Do you know what I find really interesting at this film is the first song is an I Want song, isn't it? The character sits in the carriage and says, I want this. I want someone to love me, essentially, is what she says.
Right.
But then she just keeps repeating that idea. She essentially already said that in the dialogue before. And it's that sort of constantly, like, it's like you said, the songs kind of just reiterate what we've just been told in the dialogue. So I do have a feeling that if we were to take the songs away, the film would still be coherent.
And to repeat my prior dramaturgy role, if she fell in love with Christian at first sight, what are the stakes? Like what would threaten that love that seems to be unshakable? So
it would have been interesting if they had a conversation. Like they bumped into a conversation and she was closer to him, and as soon, and she actually distracted him through conversation when he was pickpocketed, and she was like oh, thief, and that's what makes him go. And she's like, oh, I never got to find out his name, never got to find anything about him, and we'd have that in song. That would have given us a kind of, I'm desperate to find out who this person is. I said to Paul, I hate the fact that the first song is after dialogue, as after a dialogue section. I would have loved that first section to be a sung moment between her and whoever this person is that's living with her. I think it's meant to be like a chaperone, but why has she got a chaperone? She's meant to be an orphan. Like, who's this person? Is it someone? Is she like a nurse figure, like in Romeo and Juliet? Like, who's this person? Is she a friend? Is she a confidant? Is she? I didn't get who that character was supposed to be at all, other than slightly bossy chaperone. I would have loved to have started between a sung conversation between those two about like where we are, what city we're in, what's going on right now, where they're going, all that kind of sort of things. What the stakes are, like which they try to explain the dialogue. Like a really upbeat kind of interesting song about like she's like, you can't marry for love, because they loved it, we need money, you need to marry for position, and like sort of like grappling kind of number between those two. And then as soon as she opens the doors into the rest of the world comes alive when we start to figure out what we are, what's happening. And then part of that opening number, you get like her inner thoughts. You get that I want moment in the middle of that. And then that moment where she bumps into Christian and they had some sort of musical moment, and then where they actually interact. And you get an idea of the sense of the whole world and those characters within that opening number, rather than figuring it out through dialogue and a small I want song. Do you see what I mean? That's what I wanted at the beginning.
That would be your I want song about the musical.
That would be my I want. That was basically my I want song about the musical. Indeed, that was how I would. That's how I would rewrite this, and then I would have Cyrano appear with a very flamboyant "Look how great I am" number, which is not trying its best to be Hamilton, because it's failing a return, because it's not Lin-Manuel Miranda. But,
right, or if you were going to do a Hamiltonian rap, at least give it the personality of Cyrano, as opposed to this bitter kind of hard-nosed, disappointed.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're kind of covering the same ground.
Yeah, we're covering the same points, but you know what? I've got so many ideas in my mind about how much better I would make this film and where I would position the songs, because that's another thing. Like, I would position the songs in completely different places. Like, I found myself thinking all the way through this film, this would make a great song. Why is this moment not a song? Do you know what I mean? Like for example, like when they're in the gallery where Christian's gone, I don't need you, Cyrano. I can be seductive and romantic, and I'm gonna go have a conversation with Roxanne, and it's gonna be fine. I would have loved that to have been a musical moment, like a song that's really like basic, like music that's really like the rest of the film. Music that's really basic with lyrics that's really basic, and Roxanne's like, what? And then they go into this song where she sort of like takes over and she makes it into this sort of like slightly more complicated number that Christian can't keep up with. Like, that would be so interesting. But so we got this boring dialogue scene with a song afterwards, which is kind of just explaining what just happened.
Exactly right. You want exposition to happen in a song, not after a song. A song shouldn't just be recapping the thing that the story already told us.
Exactly. Oh, Mike, we should just rewrite this. We should just rewrite this. And
filmmakers, if you're listening, we're offering our services available for no cost, and you don't even have to give us credit. We will be like Cyrano. We'll ghost fix your film for you and just release a director's cut in a year. No one will remember the first one. It'll be great.
Any the wiser.
I think we've run our rapier through the corpse of this movie several times, and we've whispered what comforts we can.
We have,
so
alas.
Perhaps it is time to wrap up. But I think this is a film that I call an instructional fumble, because if you think about this film, you learn quite a bit about musical theater in contemplating what it didn't get right. So I almost encourage people to see it, in the spirit of this tastes terrible, here, try it. It really is an interesting film to discuss. And as you know, we could clearly have kept going for another half an hour at least. So I give the filmmakers credit for coming up with something that was interesting and layered and nuanced. Even if we don't like those layers or those nuances, it had an identity of a kind, and it was food for thought.
It's educational, like this podcast. So if you like this podcast, you might like watching this film for educational reasons.
Exactly right. But please continue listening to the podcast, because we will try to disappoint you less. Anyway, I think that's a good wrap point for us, isn't it?
Mm-hmm, indeed. Well, thank you, Mike.
Thank you as well, and look forward to maybe after this we need to talk about Tick, Tick, Boom, because I think it would make a very interesting comparison and contrast object to Cyrano. So put that on your scheduler.
Well, it's only 6 p.m. here, Mike, so I could very easily watch it tonight if I've got time.
The day's young. All right, so maybe we'll do a double episode. But for now, I think we're going to thank everyone for listening as always, and please continue to follow the podcast, available at all podcast venues near you, and of course at musicaltalk.co.uk, which is British for .com. Until next time, we will say farewell for now.
Bye.
For more information about Musical Talk, please visit our website at musicaltalk.co.uk. You can email us at feedback@musicaltalk.co.uk, listen to past episodes on iTunes and YouTube, and follow our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.